It began amid sheer exasperation. By the closing months of 1944, U.S. forces across Europe observed endless streams of German armored vehicles reappearing on the front lines quicker than Allied forces could knock them out. One after another, Panthers and Tigers kept emerging relentlessly. Aerial support offered some relief, of course, but foul weather, jammed airstrips, and exhausted fighter bombers often left infantry exposed and vulnerable. At some drenched runway in France, a team of U.S. Army Air Forces technicians gazed at a stationary C-47 transport aircraft, and one of them quipped semi-seriously, "Why don't we simply mount weapons on it?" The remark hung in the air without a chuckle. That casual suggestion sparked one of the most audacious makeshift efforts of World War II. A frantic bid to transform a defenseless plodding cargo hauler into an anti-tank weapon practically overnight. Protocol took a back seat now. This was raw necessity clashing with ingenuity under the cover of darkness. The C-47 Skytrain served as the unassuming backbone of the conflict. It ferried paratroopers to Normandy, airdropped essentials over Bastogne, and evacuated casualties from the chaos. Yet it wasn't engineered for combat. Its lightweight aluminum fuselage lacked protective shielding, and its power plants prioritized reliability over aerial skirmishes. Still, as Allied advances pressed further into the continent, technicians grasped that they couldn't afford to hold out for fresh planes from distant assembly lines. They needed to improvise using whatever idled on the field. Dispatches from the battlefield painted grim pictures of Allied foot soldiers trapped by armored assaults in misty hamlets. Dedicated close support aircraft such as the P-47s and Typhoons simply couldn't arrive swiftly enough. Maintenance teams started pondering, could our supply birds step in? They boasted sufficient reach, cargo capacity, and robust builds. Armed properly, perhaps these aerial lorries might unleash havoc briefly enough to sway an engagement. Thus, on a bitterly cold night in December 1944, mechanics at an advanced airfield commenced dismantling a C-47 down to its essentials. They removed surplus seating, affixed strengthened panels via welding, and rounded up orphaned 75mm M4 howitzers, the very ones fitted to Sherman tanks. Certain variants even incorporated wing-mounted rocket launchers pilfered from P-38 Lightnings. The process was disorganized, unauthorized, and teetering on lunacy. But breakthroughs in wartime seldom seek approval. Whispers circulated among bases that the hangar crew was crafting a beast. Aviators initially scoffed, but their amusement faded when the darkly coated C-47 emerged, its forward section pierced by a protruding gun barrel. One flyer dubbed it the Dragon Wagon, while another labeled it the Sky Reaper. Initial firings rattled the whole base. The kickback almost ripped the front end loose. Crews rushed to bolster the frame using metal girders salvaged from damaged Jeeps. They fine-tuned the balance, tweaked propeller thrust, and ran trials anew. At last, the plane discharged its load without mishap. A mere freighter had evolved into an airborne gun platform, and that's when the real frenzy ignited. Officers, doubtful but curious, issued tentative approval. One go and we'll evaluate. The builders toiled through the night without rest, pounding metal and splicing cables till daybreak. They understood this venture might prove either a godsend or a disaster. Come morning, an unprecedented spectacle awaited. A supply aircraft repurposed as a tank destroyer. Freighters like the C-47 Skytrain or Dakota to the Brits weren't crafted for battle. Their role was to sustain the fight. Conceived in the late 1930s, this machine aimed solely at shuttling passengers and cargo securely across distances. No provisions for weaponry, no defensive layers. Essentially, a winged delivery van. Nevertheless, come the harsh winter of 1944, that van faced demands to perform like an armored hunter. To grasp the absurdity, contrast it with purpose-built combatants. Consider the A-20 Havoc or the P-47 Thunderbolt, streamlined, powerful beasts bristling with armament. The A-20 slung ordnance beneath its fuselage, packing forward guns and rear turrets for defense. The P-47 stood as the aerial equivalent of a brawler, a single-engine powerhouse capable of plummeting, raking targets, and evading flak with ease. Now envision the C-47 next to them. Dual motors, broad wings, drab olive finish, exposed underbelly, sluggish like a bus on wheels. peak velocity around 230 mph, barely half a pursuit plane's pace. Should a Messerschmitt Bf 109 or FW 190 close in, it spelled doom for easy marksmanship. Yet the Allies possessed fleets of these birds, outnumbered only by their ubiquity, prompting innovators to muse, why not harness the surplus? The concept drew from prior experiments. Back in the war's early phases, British forces had jury-rigged bombers, adapting haulers into ad hoc attackers amid North Africa's shortages. Over in the Pacific theater, American aviators had trialed rocket attachments on lumbering aircraft to pummel Japanese logistics vessels. What set this apart was the ambition. Europe's theater demanded a tool to breach heavy plating, beyond mere anti-vehicle harassment. So the technicians examined the C-47 structure with the meticulous care of surgeons gearing up for a high-stakes operation. Its body could bear additional loads, though just on the edge. Each modification required perfect equilibrium. Installing a gun in one spot demanded stripping fuel reservoirs elsewhere. They cut openings in the front section to accommodate the weapon and then rerouted the controls in the flight deck, allowing the second pilot to serve as the shooter. It embodied pure improvisation at its most unpolished. Within the aircraft shelter, the air crackled with friction between aviators and technicians. The flyers had navigated these machines amid flak barrages above Arnhem and Normandy. They understood their vulnerability all too well. "You're transforming my transport into a combat jet," one quipped, a mix of anxiety and satisfaction in his voice. The technicians smirked in response, muttering it better survive the initial ascent. What drew them to the C-47 as a prime base wasn't merely its abundance, it was the reliability in flight. A consistent trajectory allowed for precise shooting, particularly with substantial projectiles such as the 75mm M4 round. Though the transport lacked protective plating, it could haul more munitions than any pursuit bomber in the region. Come January 1945, informal sketches for the refit began spreading unofficially across aviation bases in France and Belgium. Directives remained unofficial. They came as hints, nudges. A senior officer might visit the shelter and offhandedly remark, "If your team pulls it off, I'll approve the documents afterward." This captured the essence of wartime red tape. Act first, seek permission later. The twist was that these aerial armor destroyers didn't originate from high command. They emerged from oil-smeared fingers and chilly workshops, where eager young workers trusted that sufficient bolts and determination could turn a freighter into a tiger hunter. And they proved correct. That evening, the repair bay stayed active. A group of 12 labored beneath exposed lamps and harsh spotlights, with hammers ringing and spanners bouncing sounds off the tin siding. Their superior issued a simple directive. If it takes to the air and discharges, that's sufficient. No guides, no diagrams, just instinct and haste. The field leader had designated one C-47 for the trial. This veteran frame had previously ferried jump troops over Normandy and relief goods to Bastogne. Now it rested gutted, deck panels lifted away, entry panels detached, benches piled aside. The specialists calculated every available bit of interior room. Space was essential for the 75 Plingitsy M4 gun, a field gun typically embedded in Sherman vehicles. The initial hurdle was the kickback. Discharging that piece aloft risked shredding the whole aircraft. The team bolstered the forward body using salvaged shield panels, fusing them with exacting skill to avoid any errant flame melting the alloy exterior. The weapon had to sit low and balanced, exactly matched to the plane's balance point. They scavenged components from damaged B-25 Mitchells and secured altered shock absorbers. Next came the munitions problem. Every round tipped the scales at more than 15 pounds. Housing scores of them required reshaping the hold into a storage array and linking an automated supply chain. One worker wisecracked they were crafting an airborne Sherman with added flight surfaces. His colleague replied, "If it blasts off more than a single shot without disintegrating, drinks are on me forever." While the crew toiled, aviators drifted in and out, observing with doubt. Lieutenant Jack Ellison, a C-47 operator from the 439th Troop Carrier Group, would remember spotting the gun initially and asking, "Are you certain it won't blast me from the heavens?" The specialists merely grinned. "Only if you squeeze too forcefully." Then arose the wiring chaos. The gun's activation line needed redirecting via flight panel levers not built for such demands. They improvised a firing setup on the second pilot's yoke with leftover comms wires and plane power sources. For verification, they chambered one inert cartridge. The initial attempt sparked wildly. The follow-up succeeded. As morning broke, the shelter reeked of lubricant and charged air. The workers stepped away, gazing at their creation. The C-47's smooth prow had become a rugged shielded prow with a protruding gun tube jutting forth like a predator's maw. Flanking panels held rough fixtures for .50 caliber Brownings. Beneath the wings they fixed short launchers, salvaged rocket pods from a crashed P-38 Lightning. Astonishment hit everyone that it came together in under 12 hours. Upon the base chief's arrival to review, he paused in silence for an extended beat before declaring, "You've truly accomplished this." He mandated a trial run on the spot. No fanfare, no photographers, just unvarnished validation. The aircraft taxied along the strip, power plants thundering more fiercely due to the extra mass. During liftoff, one technician whispered, "Safe travels, you wild contraption." Soon after, the armed craft soared. Reaching 2,000 feet, the evaluation team chambered a real round. The flyer steadied the course, targeted a derelict vehicle set for drills, and announced, "Round 1 away." The gun recoiled hard. The front end bucked sharply, yet the frame endured. Moments on, the vehicle on the ground disappeared. In a burst of orange flame and swirling dirt, the troops below burst into shouts of triumph. The unthinkable had soared and unleashed its fury. By nightfall, urgent messages raced through headquarters. Test model viable, ideal for low-level ground strikes. No one realized at the time, but that frantic all-night trial had sparked the birth of a revolutionary flying weapon, the aerial gun platform. The beast now had an identity. Base personnel began dubbing it the Cannon Express, while aviators opted for a title that better captured its essence, Sky Reaper. It held no formal designation, yet its purpose was crystal clear to all. The humble transport had morphed into an aerial destroyer of armored foes. What arose from that grueling vigil lacked grace, yet it struck fear into hearts. The designers drew from a prior U.S. trial, the B-25H Mitchell. This variant of the renowned twin-engine bomber featured a 75mm M4 cannon protruding from the front, identical to those on Sherman tanks. Such armed Mitchells had already demonstrated the devastation possible from above. They excelled in the Pacific theater, shredding Japanese vessels and fortifications alike. Adapting that concept to a hauler like the C-47 plunged into uncharted territory. The initial working model employed a trimmed-down M4 to ease the kickback strain. Operating it required 2 crew members. The main pilot aligned the sights as the second managed the firing and reloading. Ammunition entered by hand, shell by shell. 15-pound projectiles maneuvered through a tight forward bay once occupied by breathing hoses. Each discharge jolted the whole body, dislodging gear and unsecured fittings. Beneath the wings, teams affixed arrays of M8 rocket launchers, 4 per side. The strategy was straightforward: deploy the main gun against major threats, barrage with rockets to halt armored advances. Together, the setup hauled almost 1,000 pounds of munitions. Sure, it lumbered along, but its impact thundered like a storm. Its debut combat run unfolded in early January 1945, high above the Ardennes. Scouts had detected a modest German tank formation creeping along a frost-blanketed path near Houffales. Dense mist thwarted swift interceptors from engaging. Yet the retrofitted C-47 could hover patiently at low altitude. The Sky Reaper droned over the treetops, concealed by the murk until the initial boom reverberated through the gorge. It nailed a half-track, disintegrating it in moments. The co-pilot scrambled to chamber another round while the pilot shifted position for the next mark. Soon, the follow-up blast rang out. Yet another detonation, another bullseye. Below, Wehrmacht troops fled in disarray, seeking shelter from an unidentified aircraft overhead. This machine's edge lay not solely in its arsenal, it was its endurance. Interceptors needed to swoop and retreat fast to evade flak. But this warbird could circle for almost 2 hours, methodically hunting down prey. What seemed a weakness, its sluggish pace, proved a strength. Accounts of the sortie circulated rapidly. "Freighter downs Panzers," one wireless tech quipped. Skeptical officers held out until spotters verified the wreckage precisely as reported. Overnight, demand surged for a Sky Reaper or any comparable machine. Come February, additional C-47s underwent similar hasty upgrades. A handful swapped in paired 37mm automatic guns for the lone 75mm. Some integrated dual 50 caliber flank mounts for pinning down foes. One team experimented with a belly-directed setup to strafe armor from overhead, echoing the Stuka's lethal accuracy. Perfection eluded them. The backlash still battered the nose section, demanding constant fixes. Sighting relied on a basic chalk mark across the canopy. Flaws aside, it delivered results. Every triumphant outing boosted morale. An initial gamble evolved into a strategic game-changer. The builders grasped they weren't merely filling a gap in aerial aid, they were reshaping doctrines for how planes could rule the battlefield. As these makeshift gunships taxied home, their hulls battered and trailing exhaust, their creators at last saw the transformation. A mere freight carrier reborn as an emblem of Yankee resourcefulness in the heat of battle. Real validation arrived when concepts clashed with pandemonium, live fire amid turmoil, not sterile drills on barren turf. In March 1945, as Allied forces thrust into the Reich's heartland, Panzer opposition intensified everywhere. The Sky Reaper drew duty, safeguarding a column progressing along the Rhine, tasked with neutralizing lurking threats from enemy steel. Its survival hung in doubt. Dawn of the op brought icy rime on the surfaces. The quartet aboard inspected the fittings, tallied rounds, and hoped the structure endured. The lead, Captain Howard "Red" Morgan, boasted scores of logistics flights under his belt, though this marked his inaugural command of such a firepower beast. With the props thundering awake, he glanced toward the co-pilot flashed a grin and remarked, "Let's check if it hooks her." The C-47 rose into the air slowly, burdened by its added plating and extra rounds, seeming ponderous and hesitant. Beneath them, the landscape faded away into a mosaic of snowy expanses and charred woodlands. Their objective was in view, a retreating German convoy snaking through a modest hamlet near Remagen, the very spot that had endured 2 full days of shelling. Smoke plumes were visible by the time they neared. "Approaching low," Morgan announced, easing back on the throttles. Gusts rattled the aircraft as it descended to 500 Taliao. The co-pilot peered through the makeshift gun sight, a simple affixed pane smeared with grease, and aligned the aim. "Got the mark," he whispered. "Fire!" The kickback slammed like a sledge, instruments jittered in the cabin. On the ground, a Panzer IV burst into a fireball. The co-pilot chuckled in astonishment. "Dead on!" he yelled. Morgan veered to port, looping back while anti-aircraft bursts dotted the sky nearby. They slammed in fresh ammunition. It took 13 seconds to chamber it, secure it, and unleash again. Boom! A second impact, striking a half-track group this round. Haze shrouded the roadway. Now the enemy responded, their 20mm weapons sparking from the tree line. A shell ripped into the C-47's starboard wing, punching a hand-sized gash in the metal, yet the power plants persisted. Morgan held course, swinging the craft into a broad turn as the flank gunners unleashed their 50 calibers. The noise overwhelmed everything. Nose cannon roared ahead, while door-mounted machine guns chattered furiously. The clash wrapped up in under 10 minutes, leaving the path strewn with debris. Blazing tanks, vehicles, and personnel carriers smoldered amid the drifts. The damaged gunship, quivering and scarred, hobbled toward Allied territory. Oil seeped from one motor. A rocket pod had been sheared away, but they touched down safely. Ground crew rushed over, staring in awe. Soot charred the forward section, punctures riddled the surfaces, yet the gun remained operational. Captain Morgan stepped out, brushed grime from his cheeks, and declared plainly, "It delivers." News traveled swiftly. Skeptical leaders who once branded the effort foolhardy now clamored for details. Was duplication feasible? Expansion possible? Records remained vague. Most such sorties were off-the-books adaptations, but post-Rhine engagement, top brass took notice. That week, technicians in Britain and Italy tinkered with comparable conversions on various fuselages. Some adapted B-25s, others modified surplus transports. Not full-scale output, but evidence that desperation sparks creativity, and occasionally it succeeds. For the airmen involved, the memory lingered vividly. Morgan's co-pilot, Lieutenant James Buddy Cole, recalled years later, "It lacked elegance, but that gun's blast made time stand still, like the planet held its breath." The Sky Reaper had endured its baptism of combat, reshaping U.S. Air Force views on ground attack roles for good. Those makeshift aircraft's triumphs echoed across squadrons quicker than any directive. As U.S. forces forded the Rhine in March 1945, innovators from bases throughout Europe duplicated the approach in ad hoc forms. None matched exactly. Every version was a patchwork of pilfered arms, improvised fittings, and on-site cleverness. The core idea stayed constant: transform lumbering transports into potent strikers. Outcomes stunned commanders. These repurposed haulers, unsuited for war by design, showed that steady loiter time trumped velocity in battlefield aid. Fighters streaked by at close to 400 men-at-hours, but these converted beasts could circle targets like predators, delivering blows with eerie accuracy. Ground soldiers started summoning them via wireless, hailing the winged hauler. A mere trial run evolved into foundational strategy. Planners assessed prospects for purpose-built variants. By April's end in 1945, dispatches from Europe highlighted the gun transport shift, praising its prowess versus unarmored and tracked foes in foul conditions. Yet, peace loomed, halting any widespread rollout. The notion simmered until the following war. 5 years on, with Korea igniting, the service recalled those gritty fixes, and as Vietnam intensified through the 1960s, the vision resurfaced, formalized, polished, lethal. Behold the AC-47, spooky. It evoked the past, the familiar C-47 skeleton, now toughened, shielded, and armed with 3 flank-fixed 7.62mm miniguns that could discharge 6,000 bullets a minute. Rather than anti-tank blasts, it rained luminous streams, a nocturnal inferno scorching the foliage. U.S. forces dubbed it Puff Puff the Magic Dragon. The genetic trail led directly to those makeshift adaptations from 1944. It stemmed from the conviction that a freighter aircraft might serve beyond mere hauling duties. The military then polished the notion further through the AC-119 and ultimately the AC-130 Spectre. That Spectre marked the pinnacle of the conflict-born vision, a soaring bastion that could hover for extended periods, deploying flank-fitted howitzers and rapid-fire guns, all directed by advanced digital targeting systems. Every progression, from the C-47's hasty overnight tweak to the extravagantly priced AC-130, rested on identical groundwork: methodical, unyielding, devastatingly accurate armament. None of this would have emerged without a handful of weary technicians riveting weaponry onto a cargo bird inside a grimy shed in France. Scholars unearthed fragmented battlefield accounts detailing those initial armored vehicle destroyer adaptations. Many consisted of scribbled journals or upkeep records, scarcely intact. A dispatch from February 1945 stated plainly, "Converted transport used in ground assault roll cannon effective. Recommend further testing." That terse official note could stand as the understated origin document for today's gunships. What elevates the tale is its sheer offhandedness. No Project Sky Reaper lurked in the records, no secret initiative. It lacked even endorsement from the War Office. These were soldiers spotting a shortfall, insufficient close-range aerial aid, and addressing it using available resources. Such on-the-spot ingenuity arises only when protocols yield to urgency. From that point, combat flying transformed irrevocably. The takeaway endured. Velocity isn't paramount. At times, a deliberate, dependable base properly equipped can command the field in manners that flashy interceptors never could. That's the reason, years on, as AC-130s patrolled skies over Afghanistan and Iraq, numerous crew members softly dubbed them Sky Reapers as well. A nod to that sodden French outpost where the spark ignited. As the conflict wrapped up in May 1945, those ad-libbed Sky Reaper attackers were discreetly dismantled, reforged into raw metal for peacetime cargo wings. No fanfare, no honors, just a silent fade into the annals. Still, the builders and aviators who handled them recalled every instant, the flashes, the dread, the staggering kickback that miraculously spared their aircraft. Most of those technicians and flyers were everyday troops, grease monkeys scarcely out of their teens, aviators accustomed to ferrying jumpers or gear. They weren't armament specialists. They ignored schematics. They were fixers equipped solely with tools, gut instinct, and excess rush. In their flight journals, the episode scarcely spans a few lines, yet in truth, it reshaped sky combat eternally. A short while after, as the Air Force pursued purpose-built strikers, certain of those identical technicians were subtly sought for input. They shunned self-praise, but their influence touched all that followed, from nascent gunship trials to doctrines of sustained overhead suppression. The notion of an aircraft enduring above the fray, rather than streaking through, originated in those overlooked evenings. One of the founding ground crew leads, Sergeant Bill Porter, shared with a reporter in the 1960s, "We weren't trying to invent history. We were just trying to keep our boys alive another day." His words nailed the core of battlefield creativity. Not triumph, but endurance, and it extended beyond gear. The Sky Rear narrative demonstrated that breakthroughs don't always spring from command centers or labs. They frequently start in a chilly outbuilding, with a cluster of bleary-eyed guys confronting an insurmountable challenge. They lacked weeks. They had no plants. They faced a cutoff, daybreak. And by first light, they delivered a functional gunship. Years afterward, as the AC-130 Spectre ascended to become one of the globe's most dreaded flyers, wheeling soundlessly above woodlands and sands, unleashing pinpoint barrages on foe strongholds, the elder hands who toiled on that inaugural freighter overhaul likely sensed a haunting echo. They'd witnessed its precursor amid the haze and flares of 1944. Nowadays, in galleries nationwide, polished C-47s sport Normandy camouflage, lauded for paratroop drops. But not one bears the marks of those rogue trials. No gun-nosed prow, no charred bodywork. The service never cataloged them as an official variant. Their chronicle persists chiefly via the accounts of participants, murmured at gatherings and oral histories. Nevertheless, their imprint is incontestable. They transformed a lumbering, benign hauler into a fire-breathing beast. They erased the divide between ferry and fighter, between terror and genius. Their daring didn't merely plug a void in a frantic clash, it scripted the opening page of an innovative era in air battles. The next occasion you spot a contemporary gunship wheeling mutely over a war theater, recall it originated with a smattering of oil-smeared palms, a pilfered Sherman barrel, and a notion too audacious to dismiss. Because occasionally, the next era of warfare doesn't emerge from high-tech labs. It takes shape in the blink of an eye inside a chilly aircraft shed, amid the clang of pounding metal, when an inventor eyes a battered freighter jet and wonders, what if?